need a field to track a certain piece of information about a vendor, and that field doesn't exist in my system. In Sage Intacct, you can just add that field. They have the capability to add pretty much as many custom fields as you want, and it's not done through coding. It's not done through, having your IT people do it. It's literally a menu-driven process to add a field. And I think people are hesitant and afraid to get into that side. It's very easy to do. And when you do things like that, you unlock the ability for yourself to create all these other kinds of fancy or more custom kind of reports that you may need to develop that you're still kind of going back and doing in Excel, even though you don't really need to.
Welcome to the AI in Accounting podcast. Now, here's your host, Joshua Feinberg of Vic.ai.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg from the AI in Accounting podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. Today I'm joined by Jim Norton, who is a senior technology consultant at Dorton. Jim, thanks so much for joining me today.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So the first place I usually start, we're going to get into rolling up our sleeves and talk about Sage Intacct in a few minutes. But before I'd like to do that, I want to get a feel for what got you to where you are in your career today. Did you always want to go into accounting or finance? Was technology a big hobby of yours growing up? Did you go to school? How'd you get to where you are career path-wise? And then how do you fit in your current role in Dorton?
Sure, yeah. So I took a very, non-traditional path to get where I am. So back in college, I actually started out as a theater major and decided that it was not going to be a job, kind of career path where I could always know that I would have a relatively secure job. So early on, I transitioned into going as an accounting major. And then for about 10 years, I've been working in the accounting industry. So I started out in public accounting, got my CPA. So basically stayed in public accounting long enough to do that. Did audits, tax returns, things like that. Worked with a lot of nonprofit clients in that time, which is where I developed a nonprofit kind of niche and specialization. And then from there, I transitioned into a lot of roles in the private sector, working in nonprofits. So working as things like accounting manager, controller, or CFO for organizations that did a lot of different social services. I'm based up in Connecticut, so I worked with the largest sign language interpreting service provider in the state of Connecticut. I've worked with Meals on Wheels. And then after that, transitioned into a role doing outsourced accounting services, did a lot of nonprofit work, and that's where I actually encountered Sage Intacct for the first time and instantly kind of developed this spark and knew that that's the kind of area I wanted to be working in. So started doing work with Sage Intacct. Initially, I was a customer on Sage Intacct, and then I transitioned into joining a role with a partner organization, which is where I am now, which is Dorton. And that's how I got here. So a lot of twists and turns, been on both the client side and the professional service side. But now I'm pretty secure and pretty much working 100% with the technology, which is awesome.
It's really interesting that you brought that up, the idea of being bought into and a big fan of Sage Intacct before you went into your current role of helping other companies with their implementation, because I've heard that quite a bit, where Sage has done a tremendous job, I guess, with building brand, great customer experience. People just love the platform so much that instead of Intacct being maybe 20, 50% of their job, they decided they wanted to be 110% of their job and help lots of different companies with Intacct as opposed to just one.
Absolutely. I was like, I don't want just one environment. I want to be able to play in as many as I want. So
definitely keeps it interesting, exciting, keeps you on your toes. The first place I want to start is to get a feel for what you would tell somebody that is brand new to Sage Intacct. Maybe it's somebody that joined Dorton that used another ERP or cloud accounting platform in their previous job. Maybe it's a client that's never worked with it in the past. You're sitting down with them over Zoom or over coffee, what have you, and giving them a few pointers on what they can expect with Intacct. Where would you start?
Sure. The first place that I start, and whether it's an employee, whether it's a client, it all starts at the same place, and that starts with training. And with Sage Intacct, they're very fortunate that Sage Intacct has a very robust product training department. It's actually a full team of people who do educational resources for Sage Intacct. So it ranges all the way from self-paced videos, tutorials, articles, to actually live instructor-led training classes. And those live instructor-led training classes in normal times and in kind of the non-COVID craze, some of them are on site all throughout the country. Now they're all virtual, but they still do an excellent job doing a live instructor-led training over something like a WebEx or Zoom. And that gives you a really good foundation. They have courses that are geared towards just kind of getting started with the product, working with it day to day. For those of us on the professional service side, they have several different certifications that we can get. And just really take advantage of the training opportunities because they're developed thoughtfully and they're designed to really get you going. And when you're done with that, you can access the Help Center. And I think that Intacct probably has one of the best sets of product help out of any accounting software on the market. Because for instance, if you're on a screen in Intacct and you're totally lost and you don't know what to do, if you click Help, you can actually click a button that says Help on this page, and it takes you to an article that's geared towards exactly what you're working on at that moment. So, and that help is full of really well-developed details about exactly what each field means. And it also gives you the opportunity to review kind of real-life examples that they've written into the help text to help you put it in context.
So the first place to start by far and away is the training courses, which in more normal times could either be taken online or in classroom training, and as well as the help, which it sounds like a big part of the power of the help is that it's contextually relevant and knows where you are and offers suggestions on that.
Absolutely.
Among the training classes, are any particular favorites that you'd have, or is it just follow a standard progression like a beginner 101 type class, or does it depend on what they're going to do in the platform?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. Intacct does they've developed what they call learning paths. So if you have you're a certain kind of role, for instance, you're a controller or you're a staff accountant, they have learning paths developed to kind of what your function is in the organization. So you can use those learning paths as a kind of a guiding light. What we always do is we recommend when people start out with Intacct, especially our clients, we put them into what's called Sage Intacct Fundamentals, which is really kind of just a very comprehensive overview of how to do all the different core elements of the product. And we actually require it on most of the implementations that we do, that clients sign up for that course as part of the experience, because it just helps them to collaborate with us much better on the process of getting going.
That's really interesting. Was it ever optional and you decided to make it required, or?
Yep. There was a time where it was optional, but we saw such a difference in having that foundation if you had never worked with the product before. It's kind of just the capability to be able to speak the same language at some level when you're working on an implementation and being able to articulate what it is that you want and are hoping to get out of it. So we started to require that course, and we also do hands-on training throughout, but it's just a great foundation.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I've worked with a lot of different SaaS platforms, and I've seen one of the customer success learning development model kind of approaches is, in some cases there's a carrot, in some cases there's a stick, in some cases they're just flat out a requirement. And yeah, if you need to get everyone on the same page, it's usually a very time-effective, cost-effective way to do that. Otherwise, you end up spending a lot of time on managing expectations and why is it that way and that way, and it's right.
And we've never had a client or a customer say that it wasn't worth it. Every time they go to that course, they come back and they say, that was great. I learned a lot. It was very practical.
Cool. So that's the beginner. What about someone that has been using Intacct for a number of years, like yourself? Maybe you meet them at a conference. Maybe they're hired into Dean Dorton. Maybe they're a new client, and it's not so much that you're trying to one-up each other, like, hey, have you ever tried that? Or maybe it's a product manager that you're talking to at the Sage Partner Summit. What's your favorite power user tip that you'd tell someone that may have taken you years to figure out, that you'd advise advanced users, power users to think about?
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot of discussions like this with people, and I think the biggest theme that I see over and over again that you kind of have to, retrain people to think a different way is don't be afraid of customization, because when people work in accounting software, and I guess generally accounting-minded people are a little bit wary of customization, but when you work in an accounting platform, you come to think that you have to, for example, if I need a field to track a certain piece of information about a vendor, and that field doesn't exist in my system, in Sage Intacct, you can just add that field. They have the capability to add pretty much as many custom fields as you want, and it's not done through coding. It's not done through, having your IT people do it. It's literally a menu-driven process to add a field. And I think people are hesitant and afraid to get into that side. It's very easy to do. And when you do things like that, you unlock the ability for yourself to create all these other kinds of, fancy or more custom kind of reports that you may need to develop that you're still kind of going back and doing in Excel, even though you don't really need to. So I think that's my number one thing for a power user is embrace what Sage Intacct calls either customization or platform services. That's the name of the functionality in the product. And take advantage of what you can do in there. There's so many things that you're probably doing manually, and when I started out using Sage Intacct was doing manually, that you learn, hey, I don't have to do that. I don't have to tell somebody, don't code a transaction this way. I can actually write a rule in Intacct that says they're not allowed to code a transaction this way, and it will stop them. So, once you embrace the power that you can unlock inside customization or platform services, a lot of your work is going to get automated and those more mundane types of tasks.
So with the field level customizations, with the platform services, is that something that you routinely tackle as part of your onboarding with new clients at Dean Dorton?
Yeah, I would say most of our implementations use some element inside customization or platform services because, people hear customization and they get really scared because they think about other accounting systems where it's like, oh, if you customize something, wait till you have to load the upgrade and then it's all going to break. But with Intacct, there's no real kind of upgrade process. They just kind of push out quarterly releases all the time. So we do it all the time, and it's not something that is really scary. It's more of just having the flexibility because of the way Sage Intacct is built to tailor the product to exactly what you want to have.
One thing I'm curious too, is you mentioned you've done a lot of work with nonprofits. Are there certain verticals that have lended themselves to different kinds of customizations? Does your team tend to work with certain kinds of clients that have certain kind of patterns that are conducive to similar types of field level customizations?
Yeah, so especially in nonprofit, yes, we see a lot of customization related to the kinds of stipulations that donors may have on contributions that they'll give, or what is the period of this grant that we're receiving? What are the different pieces of information we may need to track related to this grant for federal reporting? And out of the box, this may all be living in a module that we call projects, and projects can be used by any organization, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, and so forth. But you can take that same functionality, put a couple of fields in it, and now you have a great grants tracking system. And for SaaS companies, we see a lot of work related to adding a field on this transaction entry screen to capture a customer PO number if it wasn't there before, or capturing a customer's business unit number, or any kind of it's any situation where it's like, I want to track this piece of information, but there may not be a standard field, so we'll just add one to capture that. And it just functions like it was part of the body of it all along.
It's really seamless. One of the things that you mentioned too that I'm curious about is you said that without this, a lot of times people are going to Excel spreadsheets when they could be using built-in or customizing the reports. Right. Is that something that most clients open up to, or they say, hey Jim, I have these 6 spreadsheets that we've been using for years. Can you figure out any way to make them history, or do you kind of have to probe, and are people more nervous about admitting that they're still using all these offline workarounds?
I think that And I think this is probably a universal thing in the accounting industry, is that we have been tied to Excel for so long that it's a slower mind shift to get out of Excel and accept the fact that you don't have to go to create a supporting schedule for everything in Excel. But people are coming around to it more and more. I think there are some clients that I have replaced entire workbooks worth of spreadsheets that are 20, 30, 40 tabs long, and they're just no longer necessary because we can create a report for it that does the same thing they were trying to accomplish.
It's got to be hours a month back on their week, right?
Absolutely. I have one client where, we used to do all their cash forecasting work, and we would have to go in on their old system. We would extract everything, go to a Google Sheet, plug in all the transactions to be able to create this report. And with Intacct, we don't have to do that. We just have real-time kind of cash and accrual books, and the reports are there.
Yeah.
So I transitioned my role to doing value-added work instead.
Because they're not spending their time on formulas and troubleshooting.
Right. Yeah. We're not
broken links.
Yeah. Right. We're not extracting data, plugging it into another spreadsheet. It's coming from the same place. So there's no need for that.
So that's for power users to think long and hard about what they can do with field level customizations, with the platform services, with eliminating spreadsheets for more powerful reporting. What do you see as the biggest mistake that people tend to make with Sage Intacct, that regardless of where they are level of proficiency, brand new, a couple of years, 5+ years, that you would like to help them prevent?
I think it's kind of a similar point that we got on towards the end of our last discussion. I think people are reluctant to accept the fact that they may be able to get rid of a lot of their Excel spreadsheets. And I think it's just, I see it as kind of more a creature of habit thing than consciously trying to resist. It's just the Excel spreadsheets are something they've had for a long time and they're comfortable with. But, once you realize you no longer have to do that, it's a very liberating thing. You get all this time back. For some things I used to have, for example, I would have my deferred revenue schedule as a controller, and I would want it broken out by customers. So I used to go and update it in Excel every month to do month-end close. Well, once I realized I could easily build that report in Intacct in about 5 clicks, I put it in Intacct and I stopped maintaining that Excel spreadsheet. So then next time the audit came around, I just popped that report out of Intacct. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is not being afraid of the possibility that you can get rid of Excel spreadsheets. And is it a little bit of an upfront time investment for you to build these reports out in Intacct so that you never have to do them again? Yes, a one-time kind of upfront time investment. But I think people, kind of fear that initial upfront time investment, so they continue spending all that extra time on Excel, right? That would go away. That's the biggest thing, I think.
Sounds like the kind of thing too, if I were your client and you started to tell me about how you've done these other things with companies that were originally reluctant to get rid of their old trusted spreadsheets that they've had for 15, 20 years, and the time savings,
right?
Especially if they can relate to either the role or the business model is kind of similar. It seems very compelling. But yeah, it's like someone that doesn't want to get rid of an old pair of sneakers, an old pair of jeans.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So we talked about beginners, we talked about the advanced user, we talked about the big mistake with people being afraid to change, reluctant to change. Where do you think we're headed in the next 6, 12, 18, maybe 24 months with how Intacct impacts their ecosystem, how it impacts the kinds of clients you work with? Where do you see the future headed if you were to put on your product manager hat for the next minute or couple minutes? What are we going to be looking back and saying, oh yeah, we saw the seeds planted for this right now?
That they've been doing a lot of work at Sage Intacct around their inter-entity transactions. So it's a really strong area for them, is working with companies that have multiple companies and have inter-entity transactions that have to go back and forth, or consolidating your multiple companies. So I think we're going to see more and more development around the areas of consolidation and intercompany accounting, which is already known for and very strong. So the fact that it's getting even stronger is a big plus. I think that they're also they've really dialed up and continued to grow their capabilities around being more of a global product since Intacct became part of Sage. They've really enhanced their capabilities around the globe. They had functionality for sure internationally, but they used to be, I think, more focused in the US. Now they're starting to roll out enhancements that are specifically for Australia, say for the way that you may need to process payments in Australia, or for handling international tax and their whole, tax engine for doing things like VAT and GST. So I think we're going to see a lot of really interesting developments there that are going to make them even more of a front runner than they already are. And I think that they're going to continue to develop and get stronger and stronger in the verticals where they are super strong. And nonprofit, they're probably already the best platform on the market, but I think that they do a really fantastic job of staying on top of the changes in the accounting pronouncements and actually, adding in developments and adding in changes to their software so that you can confidently say, yes, my software, supports what this new accounting standard says.
It sounds like it's a combination of three different things. One is transactions going back and forth between related companies that are under the same parent company ownership, which should, as companies consolidate, mergers, especially with the times we're going through now, it's probably going to be even more bigger issue. Will be important. Globalization, the software being able to simplify operating in dozens of different entities, subsidiaries, and then the verticals.
Right, definitely.
Do you think any of this is going to change the business model for a CPA firm like Dean Dorton?
I think for us, we've been a partner of Intacct for a long time. I think pretty close to when the partnerships with Intacct started coming to be. So I think it's been pretty well a part of our business model for a while, and we actually use Intacct internally as well. So we're somebody who practices what we preach, so to speak. I don't think it's gonna bring any drastic changes about to our business model. I think that we'll just kind of continue to find more and more efficiencies and to level up the value that we're able to deliver to our clients as these enhancements come out. But I think that in terms of our business model, we have a really strong outsourced accounting practice, which we do essentially 100% on Intacct already. And then we also are a VAR, a value-added reseller partner of Sage Intacct. So I think our business model is going to maintain essentially the same.
Do you see any interesting inflection points or crossovers where it becomes a no-brainer for someone to move from having Intacct run on an outsourced basis versus where they're starting to build out a team internally? And is there patterns you've noticed in the kind of nonprofits that you've worked with?
Yeah, so that really usually becomes a matter of size. So, once your organization gets to a point where, you say we have so much revenue or so many different projects or so many different grants or contracts that, there's a clear break point where outsourcing becomes, financially not viable. And so, once they reach that point where it's like, okay, well now we have to pay $500,000 a year for all this outsourcing because we need so much time and resources, that's when you start to think about, well, can we identify resources internally or recruit resources internally, and take some of that in-house. And what's interesting is some of the outsourcing that we work with is, I wouldn't call it full outsourcing, it's more like a partial outsourcing model. So some of our clients will have maybe a CFO or a controller in-house, but they rely on us for senior accountant, staff accountant type of work. And then we also have, in the other model, we also have outsourced CFO controller. So there's definitely a clear break point though, where after a certain point, it just doesn't financially make sense.
It sounds like you've thought through most of the life cycle needs of different size companies though, and have a solution potentially across the board.
Right, exactly. So, when they do graduate to taking it in-house, they just basically transition from our outsourced accounting program to our our reseller program. And the benefit of that for them also is that we know their system so well and have worked with them for so long that we continue to support them. So, we were there, put the system in place in the first place, so there's no kind of loss of knowledge from that history.
That's great. Jim, where's the best place for someone to keep up with what you're working on at Dean Dorton, to learn more about you? Maybe if they have a question about anything we talked about today, is there any social media channel that's especially a good fit for you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I share a lot of content on my LinkedIn page. I do a lot of webinars and speaking engagements for Dean Dorton specifically around Sage Intacct product areas that are impactful or that have recently had developments. So you can certainly find me on my LinkedIn, Jim Norton CPA, and then on our website, deandorton.com, there's a page for events, and it'll list out all the different events that we're hosting. We host anywhere between 4 and 5 webinars a month on different topics.
Education's so important for keeping your skills sharp.
Yep.
Helps to build trust, empowers people to make the right decisions, and we're big believers in that too. Part of the reason why we started this podcast. And I thank you so much for joining me today. This has been super helpful to get your thoughts on what got you to where you are in your current role, and seeing the interesting pattern of so many people that are involved with the Intacct VAR community getting their start working on the client side. So, talking through some of the issues around new users getting started with training and help, talking through power user issues around customizing field properties and the impact on reports, talking about the reluctance of people to making changes and getting rid of their Excel dependency syndrome, and then finally where the industry is headed given consolidation, given globalization, verticals, and how you've thought all that through at Dean Dorton. It's been really, really fascinating to walk through all this. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I'm glad you had me on here. Thanks so much.
So I've been speaking with Jim Norton. He's a senior technology consultant at Dean Dorton. It's been great having you with me today. I wish you all the best in growing your practice, and stay safe.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the AI in Accounting podcast. To subscribe and leave a review, check us out at blog.vic.ai or wherever you like to consume podcast episodes, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.